Are corporations trying to control you? You betcha. Do they really want to empower you? Not really. Maybe in a very little small band they'll want to empower you to do things for them. But you need to know that corporations by nature are there to control you. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing because it's kind of a trade-off, right? It becomes a bad thing when they go from controlling you, which we can call consent control, to controlling you. All right, so let's take a look at control in organizations on this episode of Work Trauma, how corporations really work. Hello, I'm Michael Denisoff, CEO and Principal Director of Denisoff Consulting Group, an international consulting firm that innovates organizations and helps them manage themselves better. My entire career has been dedicated to helping organizations be more successful and build thriving cultures. And this is possible, but only if organizations are honest about themselves. And that's what brings us to the Work Trauma. And welcome to the second season of Work Trauma, how corporations really work. I am super excited about this season because we continue to pull back the curtain to let you know what really goes on in corporations so you can make better decisions about your career, who you work for, and your life. I'm really excited about this season because we have some new stuff going on. I'm going to have a lot of guests this season. We're going to do some TED Talk takedowns, so I'm really excited about it. But on today's episode, corporations and control. All right, so let's talk about that. Corporations and control. I mean, do you ever work for somebody and you feel like they're controlling you? And to a degree, by the way, they are controlling you. It's just about how much, all right? And to some degree, this is okay, right? Corporations by nature are set up to control people. It's just the nature of it. They have to. Now, there's difference between control, small c control, or we could call it consented control or agreed control, which is really the social contract of how we work. We basically say, hey, you're going to tell me what to do, stuff you want me to perform, and then in return for the social contract, you're going to pay me, right? And that's okay. There's a level of control that's okay. Things get bad when it becomes something different, which most large corporations, they become something very different very quickly. So just kind of keep that in mind. So corporations by nature are there to rally the troops, so that you rally the troops so you can get things done. And we say rally the troops because, after all these years, corporations by and large are still run based on and structured like a military model, right? We have hierarchies, we have span of control, we have titles, right, or ranks if you're in the military, and we have people in charge of smaller groups. It's run just like the military, which again isn't a bad thing in itself because you need some kind of structure, right? And people have been trying different structures for a long time. But structure isn't a bad thing for the same reason you don't want your accountants to be creative, right? You need some kind of formality to it. You need some agreement. And this happens every day, right? In our society, we are controlled, right? It's just a matter about how much control. But minimally, we're controlled by laws and agreements, right? We have laws that we agree to. It keeps control of society, not becoming Lord of the Flies, right? Or Survivor Island, right? So we have rules and things we've agreed to, but it's agreed consent. It's agreed control, right? And there's a level of trust to that too, right? When we go out and drive our cars on the road, we know there's laws we abide to, and we trust other people that they'll abide by the same laws. They'll drive on the right side of the road as opposed to the left, that they'll drive a reasonable speed, they'll turn on a signal, they'll do these things so things will be effective, i.e. it works and people don't get hurt in accidents. So it's the same in companies. So when we talk about control, it's not a bad thing in itself. It's, again, if it's reasonable and if it's consented to. The challenge becomes when the control is literally about controlling people to do their will. So we've gone from like this freely agreed upon social contract to something that sounds more like oppression and slavery, right? Which they'll paint up really nice. Large companies will paint it up really nice, but you really have to wonder about how they see their employees, for sure. And, that's what you just need to know. So on today's program, we're going to talk about this structure and what happens with control in organizations, which is not a good thing now. The funny thing, I just want to go down this a little bit. Companies have been trying to figure this out for a long time. They've tried to say, hey, is there another way to structure the companies? And they do different things. They've tried to compress the number of layers in a company. So you hear about spans and layers, and all of a sudden you start taking out different job titles or different layers of responsibility. and authority. And actually, that was done a lot in the early 2000s. You saw a lot of companies try to go flat. You always hear this. We want to have a flat company, so less layers between the entry level worker and the CEO. Companies that did that, it was kind of a trendy thing to do. It didn't go so well for most companies. I'm talking most large companies, because there was a lot of unintended consequences. Part of it was that one, there were less jobs to be promoted to, and people didn't like that. They wanted to always feel like they had an opportunity to grow, which is a real thing for people, right? Number two is, because there were some of these levels, there was a lot of development that was missed. So people went from, let's say, a manager role to a director role, as opposed to maybe a senior manager role to a director role to a senior director role. So there was a lot of education, a lot of development that didn't happen during these times. So we had some of these unintended consequences that people, one, weren't being developed properly, so they would be ready for the next natural, let's say, amount of responsibility and authority. And two, people also wanted to be promoted. They wanted a place to go. So when you flatten this out, it doesn't go so well. And a lot of companies suffered for that, for sure. A big example of this, where a different structure was tried, was with a thing called Holacracy. So Holacracy was a big deal, right? I got to read it. Their official thing is, Holacracy is a system of self-management where leadership roles are not subject to traditional hierarchy of command. So it was set to be the most employee-friendly, most flat company, most kind of workable company there would be. And the company that is known for adopting Holacracy was Zappos. Now, Zappos had an amazing run. It was doing amazing things. As a matter of fact, I used to sit in my office and see the map of the United States and see the Zappos sales. And I'm like, this is an amazing company. And then somewhere down the line, they decided to kind of like, hey, we're kind of like this. We're kind of cutting edge and new. And the president of Zappos decided to kind of go all in on Holacracy, so much that he said, if you don't read this book and you want to be a part of this, I'll pay you to leave. So definitely got all into it. And Holacracy is an interesting thing. We should do a whole show on it someday. But it was this very decentralized organizational structure, let's say, that gave employees more control over their work. So it broke down traditional job roles into smaller autonomous teams that worked together to achieve company goals. So this meant titles were meaningless. So if there was no titles, it didn't matter. You can go to any meeting that you want. Decision-making, innovation were distributed throughout self-governing teams, right? There were tactical meetings to address issues and make decisions. And, it's on paper, it sounded great, right? Decentralized. Well, that sounds good. Self-governing, that sounds good. Decentralized authority, again, that sounds good too. Employee empowerment, transparency, and accountability. I'm looking through the notes here, right? So that sounds great. And guess what? By all accounts, it was an utter failure, right? So it didn't work. Now, the funny thing about all those things, decentralized, autonomy, empowered employees, that's a lot of stuff that I do as a consultant to try to help companies tap into their people better, right? To empower them, to make decisions better, to push decision making down an organization. So this was the ultimate version of that. And it didn't work. It really went bad, mostly because people didn't know who was in charge. It wasn't clear who was in charge and what people were supposed to do and how they were supposed to be compensated. So all that structure immediately went away. And it was kind of a chaotic zone from what I hear and what I've read about as well. So, and there was lack of career progression. How do you progress if there's no titles? It was very, very complex, obviously, because it's always great when you have to have 30 people agree on something. Communication was bad. Without a clear hierarchy, communication channels became unclear, leading to misalignment and misinformation. So it didn't work. And like I said, we could do a whole episode. Why it didn't work? The first thing why it didn't work is human nature. Human nature. People kind of have different values and different systems, and they do. Some people do become Lord of the Flies, and alliances are made, like we see on TV or reality shows. So a level of control maybe isn't a bad thing. All right. Why else didn't work? I think another reason why it worked, because it's so Nirvana-ish. It didn't work because you went from on to off, right? They didn't say, okay, we work like this for the last 20 years, and now we want to work like this. And they just kind of flipped the switch. And so people didn't have, let's say, the maturity or the wherewithal or the grit or the integrity to make this switch. But by all accounts, it didn't work and was bad. So it was basically a structure of no structure. And we see different things like this too, right? We see different things where it's this kind of funny socialism. I remember one of my first jobs I was at early on in my career. I was selling public programs and doing all this work, and we had this new director of our department come in, who, by the way, had no business being there because he was the CEO's son. But that's another thing. Anyway. And he comes in, and everybody's saying, we're all salespeople, right? And so we should just pool our money and our commissions and just distribute them equally to everybody. Well, right away, that on the surface, that sounds great. Just like socialism sounds great. Socialism sounds great. Everybody will partake, we'll share, we'll have ownership for everybody. And as I like to say, socialism sounds great until you're in the gulag. Because socialism, communism, there's always a party. There's always a group of people who think they have to run anything. And they live large while everybody goes hungry. Well, same in corporations and just in society in general. So this director had this great idea. Like I said, what we'll do, and got talked into it because he thought it was cutting edge, that we'll pool everybody's commissions and we'll just distribute them equally. And it sounded great, right? Because if I have a bad week and you have a good week, you lift me up, and vice versa the next week. It doesn't work like that. And guess who really didn't want this to happen? The high performers, right? The people who are actually selling, getting big commissions. Now they have to share their commissions with people who maybe weren't that good, didn't work as hard. So what happens? Of course it happens. We go to this socialism, this shared pool of commissions, and it just kind of dies on the vine. And there's an uproar because people who are really pulling their weight now, so everybody else is kind of leeching off them, right? And then in time, you either kind of keep doing it, or you leave, or you just you give up and you just kind of join the crowd. Well, I'm not going to work that hard. So it was really interesting. So things like this are hard to do. They sound great in theory. That's why a lot of the academic stuff that I've kind of seen through the years and organizational theory is just that theory. It works great in a vacuum where everybody's an angel, but in real life, it doesn't work so much. So I think it's fair to say by nature, corporations have to have a reasonable degree of control. And one of that is like, how do we rally people around a purpose, right? How do we kind of get people excited about it? Now, again, there's a way to do that. You could get people to do it by just kind of holding them accountable, being inspiring, making sure they buy into the system. And that's like the ideal to do that. It gets bad when particularly large companies just try to control people, right? And that's what they do. And far too often corporations, particularly the powers that be, the man, if you will go beyond reasonable structure and control to nefarious, or evil control, which we see a lot in organizations, right? Yeah, you see managers do this as well, right? So there's a lot of the managers that are most controlling tend to be the most incompetent and weak people there are, right? So they know they shouldn't be there. They know they're weak. So what they do just by default is they try to clamp it down, man. They try to hold you down. Because they know if you get wind that they're incompetent, it's over for them. So they really kind of hold it down. They act very punitive in so many ways. And I've had a couple bosses like this that were so obviously incompetent, and all they wanted to do is control me. Now, listen, I'm hard to control. I get it. I have an opinion on most everything. I have a big mouth. I get that. But I'm generally very respectful and very deferential to my bosses. But I'm also, if I'm told to do great work, I'm going to do great work. And this particular boss, every time I did something great, she would put me in my place. At first I'm like, well, maybe she didn't want me to have a big head. No, she didn't like that I was doing well. And she would constantly put me in my place. So that's an interesting thing of that. And by the way, and different companies need different levels of control. I hate to do this, but if you're a SEAL team, right, you have to have a high level of control because the mission is so intense and urgent and serious, right? The risk is so high. You have to have a level of control. You have to say, when your commanding officer says for you to do something, you just go do it. You're not going to have the time to question it. But hopefully by that time they built up so much trust in their commanding officer, they feel good about their competency and their character, they'll do it. So not everybody's in that situation. So companies will have different varying slopes of degree of healthy control. But again, I think that can vary. One time I was in a company and we were just being clamped down on, and that we were the people, the masses, the employees themselves, who weren't executives, were starting to kind of talk They were upset. They were grumbling, if you will, and then the CEO, who is terrible, just tried to clamp us down. And then somebody finally said, "We're just making soap." So it was pretty interesting. It was a good moment for that. Anyway, so all right, we talked about that. So we need a level of structure. To this point, nobody's found a better way than kind of this hierarchy structure we're kind of familiar with. Now, this could change very, very rapidly with the age of AI. Actually, some of the other work I'm working on right now is how people work is going to change radically in the future, in my opinion. I think we'll all be in a gig economy someday. We'll all be gig workers someday. But right now, nobody's found a better structure. So now it's really in the implementation of the structure, right? Because you need a level of spans and layers and hierarchy. It's okay. When it becomes too much, it becomes a bureaucracy, right? What we're seeing with the government, what's going on right now with DOGE challenging this bureaucracy. So that's a organization or federal agencies, organizations that have gone way too much into the bad control. Okay, so what's behind this, right? So let's talk about when good control, so let's assume there's a level of good control, but let's talk really about the bad control that most large companies do, because they put you in a square building, in a square room, behind a square desk to control you on purpose. So let's start why this is the case. And as always, I go back to my foundational thesis on this, is that for executives, their whole job is to keep, right, preserve, and grow what they have. So they want to keep their status, their prestige, their power. It's really about that. So when you do that, you no longer start making the company really successful. You're just making sure you keep your job. And we see this all the time. We see the executives make the strategy, tell everybody what to do about the strategy. The company fails miserably. CEO doesn't go down. The CFO doesn't go down. It's 400, frontline mid-level workers that go down. There's no accountability for them. Why? Because, the reason why it didn't work is because our employees were bad or the economy was bad. So we have to get rid of the employees. And I'm only the person who knows this company that can get it past this point. No, you're the guy or gal who put us into this point. So, so that happens all the time. So it's all about the CEOs, the executives, really just keeping what they have, to really preserve what they have. And that's we've talked about that in a lot of the issues in organizations. It's because of this. And the purpose of, so when they kind of cross that line to bad control or out of consent control, the last thing they do, they'll control you, they'll do mind games, and we've talked about this. The last bastion, of course, is fear, right? And the fear is, I'm going to keep you controlled. I'm going to turn you into non-thinking lemmings. So because I want to keep the status quo. And again, the status quo is keeping me in power, right? And look at our politicians. And by the way, I figured this out. It worked in organizations looking at politicians. Politicians, as soon as they win their election, the very next day, they're not thinking, wow, man, I made it. I've been elected. I'm going to serve the people and make things better. No, it's like, all right, I got this. How do I get elected in 4 years? That's what they're thinking of. They're not thinking about you. They're thinking about how they get hired, rehired, or keep their position. So again, this is just reality, and we've talked about this in depth. Somebody works hard, then they get the big perks, the big money, the big car allowance, the deferred compensation. After that, everything that made him a great leader is exchanged for, how do I keep this? How do I make sure I never lose this? So it's no longer about the company being successful. And this is a key reason why companies are not readily built to adapt to or respond dramatically to market conditions, right? Because they're so built on the status quo. And it's not even the status quo of, if it ain't broke, just keep it working. It's not even that status quo. The status quo is keeping them in power, keeping them with their titles and their money, okay? Now, sometimes this can't be ignored. Sometimes the performance is so bad, and the board of directors or the shareholders get so angry about it, somebody has to go, right? And you'll see once in a while random CEOs getting fired for doing such a bad job. If you really trace a lot of those back, they'll first blame the CMO or a CFO, right? Because these executive teams, there's inner circles in these teams, and there's alliances in these teams. And when it comes that, hey, the executives are in trouble, they always find a scapegoat, right? They'll figure out that one person, like, hey, we blame it on penny here, we'll all be able to keep our jobs and keep our status and keep our pay, which happens a lot. And again, in extreme cases, the CEO is so bad, the board of directors cannot they ignore it, and they have to go. But in general, when things are going, it's about keeping control. And like I said, a lot of this control is done through fear, right? We fear people. They scare people to doing what they're doing, right? So employees at all levels know if they push too hard against the status quo, they will be canceled, harassed, dead-ended, given unfair low reviews, fired, or creatively discharged. And creatively discharged is when your boss makes it so bad for you to work someplace that you're just going to leave. And this happens all the time to the people in control. All right. So this level of control is really as old as mankind itself, right? I'm going to stay in control. I like feeling powerful. I like calling the shots. I feel more important, a little bit better than everybody else. So where does this come from? It's basically human nature. This nefarious desire for power is something that's been around humans for all time, I would imagine, right? Most CEOs of large companies wallow in their power and control. They'll tell you they're just a regular person and blah, blah, blah. They love it. They love the fact that people will laugh at their jokes, even that they're not funny, right? They'll wallow in the fact that you're a little afraid of them and you get a little nervous when you're talking to them. Right. And the other thing, if you get CEOs to be really honest, they'll tell you they think they've earned it. They're entitled to this power and feeling special and making people cower to them. They enjoy that. And by the way, that starts happening with the really bad ones when they're managers, right? They're the little tin god below, right? They kiss up and they kick down, right? They kiss up to the superiors and they kick down through their employees. And how they treat people side to side, who knows? It can vary by day. So the people in charge, they really think they're just a little bit more special than you, that they're like superstars, and they do. They live in a different world. When you start seeing how, and I've seen it because I've been around these folks a lot as a consultant and executive coach, they live a different life. One time I was with an executive at his villa and his vineyard, and we were all waiting for him to come in, and he flew in on a Chinook helicopter. I'm like, yeah, I don't think this guy ever waits in line at TSA. Okay, they live in a different world, and they do believe they are more special than the peasants that work for them. And so why do they keep control? In the end, they don't think they can trust the masses. And it's not trust the masses to do a good job. It's trust the masses to keep them in power. So that's where this comes from. It's human nature itself, right? So it's all about maintaining their power, keeping their power. I would say there's a lot of executives I met, they would whack their own grandma if they had to keep their power. So if you are an executive, don't be like this. It's not worth it to sell your soul out. All right. Woo. So this is intense, right? So now we're understanding why there's this control. Again, some control good, reasonable control, social contract. That's good. All right. Consenting to it. Okay. Of course, I got a job to do. They're going to tell me what to do. I'm pretty cool with that. There's laws. Okay. I could do with that. Now to the point where like, hey, if you step out of line, we're going to cut your head off. Right? Well, we know this. Power can be addictive, right? So power is addictive. It hits dopamine. It's the same thing why child stars turn out so bad as adults so many times, right? They're addicted to the fame, to the power. And then when they don't have it, they freak out and they become very, very dysfunctional people. Bruce Springsteen said it in his song, Promised Land. Poor man want to be rich man want to be king. King ain't satisfied till he rules everything. It's just human nature. For not all people, for a good number of people. Like I said before, deep down, most executives enjoy the fact that you have to laugh at their jokes, that you cower to them, that you're a little fearful when you're with them. I've seen, and you've seen this. I've seen it. I've seen people hate a particular executive, but when they walk in the room, it's like, oh, hi, you're so smart. You're really a great leader. You're the best CEO you ever had, right? Why? Because they have to. Because they know if they don't do that, they'll be cut. They'll be cut deep. Cut me. And of course, yes, it's a God complex of sorts, right? So when you get that much power, and it's tempting. I've been there. It's tempting, right? Because people kind of they kind of bow to you a little bit. They're a little afraid talking to you. They want to make a good impression. Why? Because you got power, right? And they start kissing your butt. If you're a good person, it's like, dude, you don't have to do that. Just treat me good. Treat me like everybody else. I'm your boss, yes, but you don't have to do that stuff. But a lot of people do that, and there are a lot of executives love the fact that that people are kissing up to them. They get off on it. They just do. Just like the people in Hollywood, the stars in Hollywood, who they go eat in the Hollywood restaurants knowing that the paparazzi will follow them. Matter of fact, some of them call the paparazzi and say, "I'm gonna be here, at this fancy restaurant at 8." Because they love the power. They love the power. Now there are some good CEOs, right? Just like there's some good movie stars. Good movie stars, by the way, in Hollywood don't live in Hollywood. They live outside Hollywood in like Thousand Oaks, that area. So they're close enough to drive to work, if you will, but they're not in the scene, right? But the ones that are in the scene like it, and stay it and thrive on. Same thing with executives. They like the scene. All right. Executives too really love the fact that they could put someone in their place, especially if somebody speaks against them. Right? It's the substance of dictators. They get off on it, right? They love that they could, with one, I'm not sure about Michael Denisoff, they could ruin a career. And I've seen it. I'm sure in season 1, I talked about this one woman who is a high potential, best marketing person ever. This is really about 3 years in a row, high potential, succession planning, upper right corner of the 9 box. And one day she spoke up, or not disrespectfully, not even harshly, but had a disagreement publicly with the CEO. The very next week when we had our succession planning meeting, she was off, man. She was no longer a high potential. And I questioned that. And the reason I was given was bullcrap, right? It wasn't real. So just know that they really enjoy that they could put somebody in their place. And that's why, you look around, there's so many suck-ups that do well. And I said this already, even on executive teams, there are inner circles and alliances and scapegoats. It happens all the time. Again, everybody's just trying to maintain and keep what they have, right? They want to keep it. All right. So that's just know that it's the nature of people to be in control. And so your watch out is don't become one of those people. Recognize it when somebody does. And then you have to figure out, one, what you can tolerate. And usually if you're good, you can avoid a lot of that. If you do great work, in the end, I had a terrible coach in high school. My high school coach was a terrible person, terrible human being. But in the end, he played me because he wanted to win. So if you do really, really good, usually you can avoid some of this. And you don't want to get into that. You don't want to get into the politicking of it. You don't want to get into it. Because once you're in it, you're in it. It's like joining the mafia. You don't just kind of dabble in it and then pop out. Once you're in it, you're in it. So the best way to do it is do great work, have realistic expectations, and kind of make sure you know what you're getting into. All right, other manifestations of control mechanisms. It's one of I've heard this years ago. This is not mine. The mushroom principle. Feed people crap and keep them in the dark. Right. That's how they feel about employees. Right. They'll kind of just give you just enough, maybe praise you just enough, do a little kickoff meeting, really just to kind of put you in your place. And they'll justify by not telling things and being transparent. It's because they'll say things like employees can't handle this, or we don't want to worry them and stress them out at work. That's not why they're doing it. They're doing that because they want to control you, right? And they don't want you to uprise against them. So they keep you in the dark. All right, another thing, you see this all the time. I'm sure I spoke to this before. A lot of executives, a lot of these people just like to hold court, right? They'll have a meeting just to have a meeting because they know everybody's got to drop everything, even though those other people are busy. And you kind of see them there perched in their chairs, talking to people, sharing their wisdom and their insights. And I know for a fact some executives have done this just for the fun of it, just to feel good about themselves. There's no doubt about that. All right. The other thing we have to worry about is the executives, again, not all, most, and I'm talking big companies, they just like to serve themselves. One time I was assigned to do this coaching to this one executive, his name was Bill. And he was really struggling and he was pissing off people and he was doing a bad job. And I wanted to talk to him. And all he could talk about was the thickness of his rug. He felt his rug in his office wasn't as thick as the other executives. And this was a terrible sin against humanity and how it upset them. And he was going to leave and all this crazy talk. Not like, hey, how can you do a better job? You're in trouble here, man. But again, it's a self-serving thing, right? It's a narcissistic thing. All right. We also know, too, in organizations, often the message is clear. Something like, you kiss my ass and I'll do what I tell you to do, and you'll be fine. If you don't, we're going to get canceled, and you're going down. It's that clear, right? How dare you challenge me? Don't you know who I am? I'm the CEO. I'm the VP of overhead. So most people figure this out in organizations, right? That's why organizations are kind of bland and toxic, or this is a big step towards the toxicity of it. They go along to get along, right? They go along to get along, right? And we've seen this again, hundreds of times. Executive comes up with a clearly bad idea, and nobody's going to tell the emperor he has no clothes. So everybody's like, yeah, we can make that work. You're the smartest. You're great. Doesn't get real feedback. See, a great executive will say, if you don't give me good feedback, I'm going to fire you. Not, if you give me feedback that I don't like, I'm going to fire you. So we see this all the time. Again, nobody dares, and this has a cumulative effect, right? If constantly, you're afraid to speak up to the executive and their bad ideas, or if you think outside of the box, they cut your head off. In time, the whole organization just goes down, and it just turns into something ugly and toxic, which we talk about all the time, which is where work trauma comes from, for sure. And then the worst part of it too is after a CEO or the executive team kicks the crap out of their people, especially when they come up with new ideas, and this kind of puts them down. Then they go, "Our people aren't very good. They just do Me Too ideas. They don't think outside the box." And you're like, they don't think outside the box is when they do. They get kicked in the stomach. The last kind of manifestation of this control thing that I see way too often is constantly ill-equipped, incompetent managers who are easily controllable are promoted up the ranks, right? Because deep down, they know they shouldn't have that job. Deep down, they know they're not that good. So they know they're beholden to whoever gave them that promotion. And that person who gave them that promotion, who did it on purpose, knows they have total control, right? Yes, boss, you gave me a promotion to associate VP. I'm barely good enough to be a manager, but you gave me this promotion. I will do whatever you want. And this is the known. This is the nudge, nudge, wink, wink. It's known. If it's not spoken, which sometimes it is known. This is how it's going to work. All right. So that's how it works. That's control, man. That's control. So if you're wondering, as you go to work and you're sitting in your desk or your office or your cubicle and you're wondering why you feel kind of like people are controlling you, they are. Okay. Again, there's good control, consent control, and then there's this nefarious control, which, again, happens in big companies. I see it all the time. Matter of fact, I just saw a big banker executive, didn't get his way, was angry, was mad, and you're like, oh, this is who this person really is. Take away somebody's candy, you see what they're really like. Next, I want to talk about how companies control you beyond the people part of it, beyond the executive part of it, trying to keep their jobs, right? Although this all emanates from it. The first thing is lies. You're constantly, unfortunately, lied to as an employee, right? They say, oh, we care. Companies will say, we really care about their employees. They do not. For the most part, you're a cog in the machine. You're just somebody who's there. And you know this, right? You just kind of know this. When you go to the town hall of the company, the people slide is like the last slide that you have to do in 30 seconds, right? The other slides are, we had 20 slides on marketing, 25 slides on finance. But people are our most important asset, really, because it's the last slide. So just know you are generally seen as a cog in the machine or cattle for the executives. And not because, I don't want to defend them. It's because they're thinking about the business. They're thinking about themselves. So you're kind of, it's not personal to you. They'll tell you it's not personal. If you've ever been laid off from a job where there's like a mass layoff, they will tell you this. And HR teaches the managers say this. It's nothing personal. It's this business. It is personal. You just lost your job. You got to figure out how you're going to pay your bills or pay for your family's bills. It is personal, but to them, it's not that big of a deal. So I don't know. It just drives me nuts, right? So they'll lie to you. Matter of fact, a large organization I was with, we knew we were going to lay off people, and they wanted me to go out there and tell them everything was cool, and I wouldn't do it. Well, you have to do it because we want to make sure they work hard till the end. Because if we say there's going to be layoffs, they won't work hard till the end. That's a huge manipulation and a use of people as things, which I'm not into for sure. We talked about this on the one-on-one level. There's a lot of CEOs that play mind games with people or the Jedi mind meld with people. Corporations do this. They do it on purposely, particularly through the communications department, right? They'll just kind of keep you off balance. They'll tell you they love you. They'll tell you they hate you. Then they'll tell you things are good. Now they're worried about something, and you're like, you're constantly caught off balance. That, for the most part, sometimes it's incompetence. Most of the time, it's intentional to keep you off balance. A lot of times there's just, again, going back to the lies, they'll tell you that things are getting better. They'll do kickoffs. And again, we have this new role in companies the last 10, 15 years called internal communications, right? Which is all about controlling people, controlling the narrative. Whether it's accurate or not, it's really about controlling the narrative. And the purpose of the narrative is to control the people. Okay, so that's just a really big part of it. They use the word we want to empower our people. Maybe on like small work, on, meaningless work, they'll let you kind of make some decisions. But for the most part, companies don't want you empowered. They want you doing what you want you to do, which again, on the surface isn't bad. But when it goes beyond this, the surface level stuff, it's bad. Other lies, they'll do corporate programs. There's a new corporate culture program. We're going to invest $2 million in there. That's a big lie. They're not trying to change the culture, because changing the culture is hard work. You have to look at yourselves as executives. It's hard work. So instead of doing that, I'll just hire a company, give them a few $1 million, and we'll have people go through classes, and they'll feel a little bit better about themselves. Yeah, it's not a good deal. Those corporate programs are a lie, and it's a manipulation, right? And they'll often use the stuff in the class against you. That's for sure. Companies constantly lie about their employee engagement feedback. They're rarely honest about the feedback they got, and they purposely, again, ignore the bad stuff and stress the good stuff. And if the bad stuff is particularly about the CEO or the executive team, that stuff is either totally ignored or whitewashed. Again, why? Because the spin artist or the director of internal communication will spin it in such a way that it's really not the executive's fault that they're bad and not trusted. It's the employee's fault. Or it's just that they're working so hard, they don't have enough time to spend with the employees, right? And it's terrible. It's terrible all the time. The biggest lie of all for me, and I say this more and more, and again, talking to large companies, the company, the CEO doesn't deserve the loyalty they demand from you. It's amazing to me that CEOs will just expect you to be loyal to them and loyal to the company, knowing at any second if they don't like the way you dress, things go bad, they will fire you in a second with zero loyalty. But they expect you to be loyal to them because, let's be honest, they're a little bit more important than you. All right, again, we've talked about this. I'm going to talk about fear for a moment. I know we're getting on with time. In the end, people will either be motivated by purpose, inspiration, accountability, and coaching, or by fear. The former is hard, right? Coaching, inspiring people, making sure they're held accountable, that's hard work, right? It's good work. It's the best way to do it. But it's hard. So the easy way out is you just scare the people. You just scare them into compliance. Fear is relatively easy and often effective, particularly in the short term. Scaring somebody on their job is easy. Yelling at somebody is easy. Telling them that they'll lose their job or they're going to ruin your reputation, that's easy. All right. So it generally comes down to fear. Okay. If you're talented, if you're smart, if you're good, if you have energy, you are gonna get the best out of the people. You're gonna appeal to the better angels of people. But if you're not that good, you're just gonna go punitive. You're gonna know, even if things are cheery, you talk cheery, there's always this underlying thing but if you make a move, you will get your head cut off. It reminds me of a CEO of years ago. This guy could talk management speak. He could be so inspirational, and he's just amazing. But in the end, man, if you didn't like something, he'd cut you off. He cut you. He gets back at you. He nail you. And everybody knew it. One time I worked at a company where the CEO came on site, and we were told not to look him in the eye. And don't start a conversation with him unless he started a conversation with you. That's kind of weird, man. Who wants to work for that person? All right. So that's what happens. So companies do this. They control you. They manipulate you. They put you in a box. They keep you on your toes and off balance. They keep you in your place, right? And what happens, this cracks down to critical thinking. That's why companies don't want you to be critical thinkers. They want you to come with good solutions within this purview, within this box, but they don't want you to do critical thinking. And by the way, this is a universal problem. In our schools, universities, and at work, critical thinking is one, not being taught, not being nurtured, right? And companies in general, again, if you're trying to control a large group of people, you don't want those critical thinkers, because those are ones who are going to create waves, who might say something bad about you, might expose you for not being a great executive. So you don't want those people. You want people who don't critical think. And even though critical thinkers usually come up with the best ideas and better solutions, they also question the status quo. They'll question the leaders. They'll question authority. And guess what? No boss wants that. No bad boss wants that, right? So they are generally the free thinkers, the critical thinkers. They're hard to put in their place. So that means the CEO, the executive, will work even harder to put them in their place. So here's a great quote about this that you've probably heard from Albert Einstein. It says, "Great spirits have always encountered violent opposition from mediocre minds." right? Albert Einstein. Essentially meaning that those with exceptional ideas often face resistance from people with less intellectual capacity who may not understand or accept their innovative thinking, right? Why aren't companies innovative? When you come up with something innovative, unless the boss thought of it or they can see it, or and often your innovation shows how bad the work they were doing, the CEO will take down the free thinker and will often use them as an example. That's an old thing, right? It's an old tyrannical thing. If somebody pops their head up, let's really bloody them and send a message to everybody else. And it does. Scares everybody else to like, I'm not. Did you see what happened to Frank over there? He popped his head out of the hole and gave some feedback to the CEO. The CEO said, "Oh, give me feedback. Nothing's off the table." He gave him feedback, and Frank somehow disappeared. So everybody sees that, and then they pay attention to that, and they become lemmings for sure. All right, so I want to switch gears here. That's the macro level. So again, we share this with you so you know what's going on, so you can navigate your career. So you can now. Some companies are better. Some people have less control. Some people are super controlled. So you got to figure out what's your talents, where you want to work, who you can work for. I want to talk about the micro level of control. Right? And we've always kind of hit on this, how managers keep you in control. But bad managers, when they're trying to control you, they drop names or titles. They'll say, well, the CEO wanted me to do this to you, or I'm your boss. You'll do it because I'm your boss, right? And I don't have to explain anything. Can you just tell me the rationale behind it? No, I don't have to because I'm your boss. And again, there are some times where the boss doesn't have to explain everything to you, especially if there's an urgency or a timing thing. But for the most part, really good bosses will say, I need you to do this to this standard, and this is why we're doing this, because I want to give you some context to what you're working on. So yeah, it just happens. So a lot of the stuff we talked about with the CEO and the execs, we do see manifested in middle managers. It's a mindset. Now it's not as the magnitude is not as big, but you see little tyrants, little fiefdoms where they kind of run it. And again, and generally it's kissing up and kicking down. We see that. Managers tend to control, who are bad, they control with, of course, fear, right? A lot of times they control with fear because they're insecure, right? It's not just at work, but in life. So they tend to be insecure. Insecure people tend to be some of the cruelest people there are. So they're cruel. They hire insecure people because they're easier to control, but they really work hard at being punitive and overly powerful or punitive because they don't want to get exposed. Also, there's a lot of managers that are ill-equipped, right? For a variety of reasons, right? They either were chosen for that job because they are easy to control, or they were put into this role with very little leadership or management training. So they never had good models, and all they do is perpetuate bad leadership, and they dig themselves a hole within the first year of being a leader. And all of these leaders, who are insecure, ill-equipped, or not properly trained, ultimately, unless something radically happens or they're a fully driven person to improve themselves, it leads to punitive leaders, managers, right? Managers who keep people in their place. An easy give is when you see a manager when they're jealous of talent, they're jealous of direct reports. I've had many times where I had a boss one time to me say, because I was working with the executive team, went to a meeting, did some high fives with them, and she pulled me aside like, why does everybody like you? I'm like, that's a good thing. They're liking me, but more important, they're liking my work. Yeah, she did not want that. She was a terrible person. All right. The inability to hold direct reports accountable because they don't know how. It is also an issue, right? I can't really hold you accountable. I know how accountable. So then I kind of complain to my boss. These are all different things that add to the control of it, right? So some managers learn to play the game, to be loyal, to look away. As a matter of fact, most people who are moving up the chain look away at a lot of things. They themselves might not be doing unethical things, but they look away, and then they're rewarded for it. See how this works? It's not these beautiful leadership books we hear all the time CEOs or executives espousing. It's a game. It's like, are you on my team? Are you loyal to me? If you're loyal to me, I'll generally take care of you. I'll cut you when it becomes inconvenient, but I'll take care of you. All right. So that happens. Small managers, small-minded managers are small tyrants. They just do the thing. And it's when you start seeing this stuff, how they act, it becomes so obvious, painfully obvious, why how their insecurity is coming out as an punitive approach to make sure we keep people in fear. And again, sometimes it really isn't over the top, although I've seen it over the top. Most of the time it's this subtle thing like, yeah, mess with me, I'll take you down. Got it? All right. So what's the solutions? Man, we like to talk solutions here, okay? Unfortunately, a lot of big companies run this way to different degrees, but again, you're going to be controlled. Again, some people don't mind it, right? Some people like, there's a company just up the road from me. It's a Fortune 50 company. The people who work there, they're almost cult-like. They love working there. This company tells you where to put your stapler. And if that works for you, that's awesome. Go for it. If you like that level of control, awesome. If you know in 18 months, you're either going to be promoted up or promoted out, that's awesome. If you like that, do it. But most people want some level of autonomy and freedom and creativity. You just got to recognize what company is going on. So what solutions for this, right? Well, I think for companies and managers alike, it's about being in control without being controlling. Right? How can you be in control without being controlling? Meaning you're control the situation, but you're not controlling people, right? Because you want somebody, you want your manager, your executive to be in control. You want them to show good leadership and direction. But you don't want to be controlled by them personally or individually. So solution is being in control without being controlling. And really good companies do this, right? They treat their people really well. Their people they're still lockstep. They're still working together really well. They're still clear on what the mission is, but they do it through the situation and the environment and the culture. And this situation really is culture at this point. Well, as soon as you start controlling people, Houston, we have a problem. All right. So what do you got to do? Hire the right people and develop them. Mature people can make this work, right? So the assumption is if you have and that's what happened with Holacracy. They probably didn't have enough mature people or savvy people or tenured people to make that work. So you hire really good people, you hire and fire and promote based on the standards of the company. All right, it sounds, the other thing is part of this is you want to make sure you hold people accountable, right? If you're holding people accountable to what they're supposed to do, you're controlling their output as opposed to controlling the people. So you want to get people to get over, their preservation. I want to keep my job to performing. And that goes from the CEO to the frontline worker and side to side. So you want to make sure, hey, we're hiring, we're promoting based on performance, not on how good you could preserve your job. Again, this goes back to my main thesis, right? Again, get better board of directors, hiring better CEOs, and CEOs hiring better managers. It's all that, right? But usually there's this cohabitation, there's this inbredness with CEOs. We're going to talk about this when we talk about executive pay. Where did this executive pay issue come from? It's because I'm on your board and you sit on my board, and we just kind of take care of each other. All right. So the best way really to get to this and get out of this controlling is I kind of peeked on this a little bit, is to get really good at accountability within the organization, right? And we'll do a whole episode on this. But in short, when you have accountability, again, both at the top, all the way to the bottom and side to side, right? People are clear what's going on, then you're actually controlling the situation. You're controlling the culture to make sure it delivers great results as opposed to controlling people. So how do you get great accountability? Define what is meeting and delivering on the expectations in vivid clarity. So this is the clean and green issue from Stephen Covey, right? There's no gray, right? There's no gray. People are clear what's supposed to be done. You're going to hold somebody accountable to the results, not to who they are, if you like them or don't like them, right? It's merit-based. There's no participation trophies. You promised to deliver this, and you did. With a little bit more, you did or you didn't. It's just that simple, right? So there's no gray, right? A lot of times managers like the gray because they can kind of do whatever they want. They could rate people they ever want. They could get people they want. A lot of managers will keep that target moving, right, to keep people off balance. But what you want to do is make sure there's clear accountability, clear expectations, right? Like I said, this starts at the top and should be everywhere. Far too often, accountability is avoided, right? So sometimes those are tough conversations and people either are too tired, ill-equipped, or just don't want to have that conversation, right? But as we always say, you nip it in the bud, right? So you create a culture of accountability, right? You don't avoid it. You have hard conversations. You take the time to have those conversations. You get over the uncomfortable nature of it. And you're clear on the objectives and you're clear on how you did compared to those objectives, right? And we see this a lot of times with performance reviews. Everybody's kind of clumped in the middle, right? Because you don't want to have that conversation with Bob who did a bad job, because he'll whine to you, and this person, their head's getting a little big, so you kind of clump everybody in the middle, and you have your 2 or 3 people, your favorites, whether they're performing or not, your favorites, and you'll give them the exceeds expectations, right? So you want to make sure your evaluations are fair and consistent, and all the right feedback is giving to that person, right? And that's the next thing. Make sure you live in a feedback-rich environment. My biggest issue with 360 surveys, with you would do on yourself and get people's thing, is that they're anonymous. Imagine living in a company where people can't give you honest feedback unless it's anonymous in a report. I mean, you're already saying, yeah, we lost the game on trust in this organization because we can't even have honest conversations. So anyway, blah, blah, blah. And like I said, get real standards. Hire, fire, promote based on the standards and performance only. Okay. And again, this can be done in a variety of structures. There's been great examples of the beneficial, the good-minded, dictator, right? There's a guy years ago, I was in North Carolina, James Goodnight, and he was a CEO of a company called SAS. And people loved working for him, but he called all the shots. But they knew he would come and call the shots. He was extremely fair, extremely generous, and people loved working for that company. So that was interesting. I don't know where it is now. I should have probably looked that up before for that. But yeah, there's different structures that do work. All right. So what do you do personally? Personally, what's your solution? How do you add to this? First of all, don't become one of these people. Right? Do it right. Show a different way. Just do it right. If you do it right, you'll love yourself more. People love you, and over time, your career will go a lot farther for sure. Be okay if this limits your career, right? If you're not going to play the game, if you don't want to kiss ass, just know it generally limits your career to some degree. If you're really good, in time, you overcome that for sure. Know this is how things work in most companies. So research the company you want to work for, and figure out the company, what you can stomach in a company. Again, kind of knowing how that works and just kind of keeping away for that, knowing the game but not playing the game will work for you. No, not to give yourself give blind loyalty to any company. Okay? Give loyalty, particularly to your team and your coworkers, but to a company overall, man, unless it's a small business, a family-run business, something that's real, you're crazy to give blind loyalty to any kind of company. Learn yourself how to hold people accountable, including yourself. And lastly, if you become a CEO or executive, stay grounded, do whatever you have to do, and surround yourself with friends and direct reports that hold you to it. Okay? And that's how it's done. But you need to know this is how companies work. They're designed by nature to control you. The majority of the larger companies are really there to control you. And once you kind of see through that, it actually becomes a little easier. Again, I'm not saying play the game, but you navigate through the game. And then you can make better decisions about your career. And that's the purpose of work trauma, how corporations really work, is to pull the curtain behind so you know what's really going on so you can make the best decisions for yourself. So that concludes this episode of Dun Dun Dun, Corporations and Control. Join us for our next episodes. Again, we got some great guests coming up. We're going to do some interesting things with TED Talks. Hope this was helpful. Drop me a line. Let me know what you think. And we'll see you next time.